Unit 1, Cognitive Psychology. Presentation 5, Eyewitness Testimony, the effect of anxiety on accuracy.
So what have research studies shown us about the effects of anxiety on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony? A number of studies have found that anxiety actually leads to inaccurate recall. For example, in 2004, Deffenbacher and colleagues published a review of 18 studies that had been conducted on the effects of anxiety on eyewitness testimony. Many of the studies in this analysis showed that anxiety has a negative impact on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony.
However, not all of the studies analysed by Deffenbacher found negative effects. A few of the studies showed that anxiety might actually enhance the accuracy of recall. This is further supported in a real-life study by Christensen and Hubernet. They spoke to 58 people who had actually witnessed a bank robbery. They found that witnesses' recall was reasonably accurate. But even more interestingly, they found that those witnesses who had been threatened in some way during the robbery were more accurate in their recall of details than those who were just onlookers. This was true even 15 months later. This study suggests that high anxiety is associated with increased accuracy.
There is another real-life study which also found anxiety was linked to increased accuracy rather than inaccuracy. Those of you who are fans of the film Titanic will be interested. In the film, the ship breaks in half before it sinks, but this was not what was recorded in the history books. According to research by Rinolo, as many as 75% of the eyewitnesses who gave testimony reported that it broke apart when it sank. But their account was regarded as unreliable, specifically because of the circumstances surrounding the event. They were in the dark, people were dying all around them, and they were scared. Furthermore, the witnesses heard marine investigators stating that the ship was in one piece when it sank. But this misleading information did not affect the subsequent recall of the eyewitnesses, who stuck to their original version. In 1985, when the ship was located on the seabed, the eyewitness account was found to be correct despite the traumatic circumstances surrounding what they saw.
There's one final piece of evidence worth looking at. This study relates to the weapon focus effect.
Anxiety might occur because a criminal is holding a gun or other weapon, and this makes an eyewitness more likely to look at the weapon because they are scared, rather than looking at the criminal's face. The end result is that the eyewitness identification of the criminal is not very good because they were looking at the weapon and not his or her face.
This was demonstrated in a study by Johnson and Scott. Participants were asked to sit in a waiting room until the experimenter was ready to begin the study. While they were sat there, they heard a heated argument in an adjacent room. Then a man ran through the room, and he was either holding a knife covered in blood or a pen dripping grease.
We would expect that those participants who saw the man with a knife would be less accurate in their recall of the man's face. This is because they were looking at the scary weapon rather than at the person holding it.
And that's exactly what Johnson and Scott found. Witnesses were 33% accurate in identifying the man in the knife condition compared to 49% accuracy for those in the pen condition.
Evaluating the research. Perhaps the most important issue for evaluation is trying to explain why anxiety sometimes seems to increase the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, and sometimes it has the opposite effect in that it makes it less accurate. Deffenbacher suggests that this apparent contradiction can be explained in terms of what is called the Yerkes-Dodson effect. Essentially, the Yerkes-Dodson effect states that when physiological arousal is low, performance will be poor, but when physiological arousal is high, performance will again be poor. But in between, when arousal is medium, performance is at its best.
However, just to be argumentative, we're not sure if the Yerkes-Dodson explanation works here, because those eyewitnesses threatened in a bank robbery would probably be very high in anxiety, and yet their recall was very good. Let's look at a few other critical points.
First, there is the issue of research conducted in a lab. Lab studies are often criticised for being too contrived and therefore not applicable to everyday life. This might explain why some of the studies in Deffenbacher's meta-analysis found that anxiety had a negative effect. they were lab studies requiring the recall of relatively trivial details, and this might be why recall was adversely affected by anxiety. Studies of real-life incidents involve recall of key information, and anxiety might have less effect on this because, for example, people pay more attention to the major issues.
A second critical point concerns the real-life studies. There are problems with this type of research too, because in such studies it is not possible to control all of the variables that might affect recall. For example, in a real-life incident, people might go over and over the details soon afterwards when they tell their friends what happened. So, in the case of Christensen and Hubinette's research, the high levels of eyewitness accuracy might be due to repeated rehearsal of the information over time, rather than just being related to any anxiety related to the event.
Finally, we want to mention one specific criticism of Johnson and Scott's study of the weapon focus effect. The claim is that witnesses focus on a weapon because they are anxious. However, other research has shown that it's probably surprise rather than anxiety that creates this effect. Kerry Pickle carried out a similar study, and in one condition had the person holding a whole raw chicken. Participants were just as inaccurate in their recall in this condition as they were when the person was holding a knife. This suggests that weapon focus might not actually be related to anxiety.
What can we conclude? It seems clear that anxiety can affect the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, but the effect is dependent on various factors, such as exactly how anxious an eyewitness is, and also whether they are being asked to recall trivial details or important pieces of information.